Hello, and welcome to the Walrus Talks Equitable Housing, presented by the TD Ready Commitment. I'm Jennifer Hollett. I'm the Executive Director of the Walrus, and I will be your host this evening. We are thrilled to be back here in the beautiful city of Vancouver, and here at the Djavad Mowafaghian Cinema. We're also streaming live online at thewalrus.ca. So a big hello and welcome to the over 600 people who have registered for the live stream across the country and beyond. Yeah, say hi to them, they can hear you. Whether you are here IRL, in real life, or online, we encourage you to share tonight's talks on social media. You can tag us at The Walrus or use the hashtag Walrus Talks. This is a great way to take a pic, quote something you like from one of the speakers' talks, and to connect our audience in person to our audience that is following on the live stream. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we are gathered on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Stolo, and Sxwíxwtn nations. At the Walrus, we're honored to carry on a long tradition of storytelling. We encourage you all to take a moment to reflect on the land that you're on, whether you're here with us in person or joining us from somewhere else. This year, the Walrus turns 20, and we're celebrating 20 years of Canada's conversation, taking a look at who we are now. You can find our stories wherever you're looking for them, online at thewalrus.ca, in print on newsstands, or by subscribing to The Walrus. You can also listen to our podcasts or take part in events like this one. And this work is powered by our donors, our partners, and our supporters. So thank you for all being here and being a part of this, and to the TD Ready Commitment for working with us on this event. We are here to talk about equitable housing. And housing is a topic that we're all connected to. It also connects to so many other topics: health, income, family, poverty. So many stories we do at the Walrus ultimately come back to housing. And we really hope that tonight's event and further discussion will support ideas to create an environment where everyone can find appropriate housing, no matter your financial means. Tonight, we're going to be answering a range of questions that many of us have been asking ourselves. How are underserved communities, newcomers, aging populations impacted by Canada's lack of equitable housing? And what are some of the ideas? What are some of the routes ahead to best address this? Tonight, we'll be hearing from 7 speakers who have 7 minutes each, and they'll be sharing 7 different perspectives, including Kishone, Executive Director, the Federation of Community Social Services of BC, Djaka Blais, Executive Director, Hogan's Alley Society, Samantha Project Manager, ReHousing, Lisa Rupert, Vice President, Housing Services at YWCA, Metro Vancouver, Stephanie Allen, Nonprofit Real Estate Developer, Tim Richter, Founder, President, and CEO, Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, and Wilson Williams, Councillor, Squamish Nation. A big round of applause for our speakers, and thank you all for joining us.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kishone, and I am Executive Director of the Federation of Community Social Services of BC. I'm really honored to speak with you all here and to share this stage with such a brilliant and diverse range of housing experts, activists, and thought leaders. I also want to express my gratitude to everybody who's tuning in online from across Canada, because I think we are at a very important moment in our country. Housing, for the first time I can remember, is becoming the #1 issue in the nation. Now, here in Pacific Canada, that's been the case for a long time. But I remember 10 years ago when I would use the word crisis to describe what was going on in housing, it would be reported with quotes around it as if it was a theory, not quite a fact. That was 10 years ago. But 5 years later, I wrote a book called Make Housing Central about the affordable housing crisis in BC. Nobody used quotes anymore. It was the #1 issue here in the province. And governments began reacting with a wave of promises, investments, and policy changes. So I think that was a turning point in this region of the country, and that we are approaching that point nationally, which is necessary, because not one province or city or First Nation or regional district can solve this alone. I'm 46 years old, and I have 2 theories that I want to share with you tonight. One that people younger than me may identify with, and one that people older than me may remember. For my kids who are in university and their classmates, they've grown up in a Canada where most people who are born or raised or educated in a community reach an age where they no longer feel welcome. As soon as they become working age adults, they look around and there are no affordable housing options for them. Worse yet, the wages for local jobs are no longer enough to pay the rent here, and the cost of buying has increased so much over their lifetimes that only those who have family wealth can afford to be able to stay in their home community. So when these young people look around their neighborhood for living options, they see that most of what's been built over the past 30 years are mansions, which used to be smaller detached homes, and essentially penthouses. Nothing that has been built for the incomes of local residents, and certainly not for our own children. And so when a neighborhood develops in such a way that it prices out a group of established residents, traditionally that's called gentrification. So my first theory is that there is a generational gentrification occurring in neighborhoods across Canada, where young people are being priced out of their own hometowns. Statistically, I know it's true because there's a pile of evidence showing in Canada's biggest cities that we are losing our most valuable and precious asset, our young people, in droves. And in Vancouver, youth homelessness is up 32% in the past 3 years. And students who have to rent from what's currently on the market are now paying higher average rents than adults. Think about that. In our society, the people in their lowest earning years are paying the highest housing costs. What is equitable about that? And I wonder, what is the future for any community that doesn't welcome its own children? See, I'm old enough to remember a Canada without mass homelessness. And I hope I'm young enough to get to see that Canada again. And I hope my kids get to see that Canada. But it will only happen if we understand that for each and every person, housing is a right. Without housing, how can anybody maintain their health or access social services or a job or any of the things that support life and prevent harm? The mix of healthcare, housing, and social services, we call that our social safety net. And my second theory is that that is what is deteriorating rapidly, and this housing crisis is a central reason why. People older than me may remember a Canada where our social safety net guaranteed a certain standard of living. But we have lowered our standards to the point where the fastest growing demographic of people who are homeless are seniors. I don't know what a modern social safety net looks like. I would very much like to know. I think that's the research we should be doing. But I do know from living in this land across this whole country that we can do a lot better than this. In the words of the poet Shane Koyczyn, our social safety net has holes in it the shape of people. That means residents of Canada are not being offered the essentials of life that they have a legal right to. So I have come to believe that homelessness is indeed a crime, and that the victims of that crime are the people who are sleeping outside, because we've organized ourselves in such a way that denies our neighbors what they are guaranteed in law under the Charter. And we have organized our neighborhoods in such a way that denies our children a chance to build lives in the same community as their friends and family. And we have organized our policy in a way that has snipped our social safety net into pieces. And it's going to take a long time to build our way out of this. It's going to take funding and zoning and policy changes, long-term planning and emergency support now. But most importantly, it's going to take a generation of Canadians of all ages to both imagine a better future and remember our values of the past before we lose it. And if we do, we won't just be building housing and we won't just be mending our social safety net. I think it's possible that in every neighborhood in the land, we will be establishing the foundation of a country we are proud to pass on to future generations. Something worthy of our children and something welcoming for them. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Djaka Blais, and I'm the Executive Director of Hogan's Alley Society. Our mission is to improve the lives of Black people through inclusive housing, cultural programs, and community spaces. Central to our vision is the understanding that a community hub is far more than just a physical space. It's a powerful catalyst for enriching lives, fostering a profound sense of community, and nurturing a shared sense of belonging. It is without a doubt a vital cornerstone of our inclusive housing initiatives. And that's why we're establishing a Black-led community land trust in Vancouver. Housing is a fundamental human right, and it's a foundation for achieving economic, social, and racial equity. Yet for far too long, Black communities have faced barriers to accessing safe, affordable, and inclusive housing. In the Metro Vancouver 2023 point-in-time homeless count, Black community members found themselves once again overrepresented, with 6% of respondents identifying as Black, whereas they only comprise 1.2% of the population. Hogan's Alley Housing Solutions Lab research report revealed recent census data from 2016 and 2021 emphasizing the significant rent burden experienced by Black renters in Metro Vancouver, and this affecting them across various living arrangements. Black renters face several challenges in their housing search and ability to maintain rental housing that meets their unique needs, including a lack of affordable and suitable housing options, a lack of Black community enclaves, anti-Black racism, discriminatory government policies, and a lack of race-based data collection. But as advocates and activists, we're not here just to dwell on problems. We are here to discuss and celebrate solutions. So Hogan's Alley Society has been working over the last few years to deliver some key solutions. Hogan's Alley was a T-shaped alley in Vancouver's second oldest neighborhood. It became a multicultural enclave and the nucleus of Vancouver's first Black community, which started settling there in the early 1900s. Through a series of racist municipal and federal policies, including federally funded urban renewal and eventually the building of the Georgia and Dunsmuir viaducts, the community was displaced and the heart of the Black community was lost. Hogan's Alley Society is dedicated to revitalizing the historic Black presence in Hogan's Alley and daylighting Black communities more broadly in Metro Vancouver. And our mission is to ensure that Black communities are not only remembered, but also provided with the spaces and housing we need to foster a more inclusive and equitable city. We're doing this through three strategic pillars: culturally informed housing, establishing a community land trust, and community engagement. One of our key solutions is the creation of Afrocentric, affordable, and culturally sensitive housing. We've been building our capacity as a culturally informed and centered housing provider through partnerships, research, and service delivery. By integrating the cultural heritage and unique needs of Black community, this approach ensures that housing is more than just a shelter. It becomes a place of belonging, healing, and empowerment. This is complemented by our community care program, which offers cultural support and programming and basic needs for Black and African diaspora community members. We connect residents with elders and teachers in addition to land-based programming. We also offer intervention and advocacy for the Metro Vancouver Black African diaspora with emergency housing needs to set up their housing and avert eviction for folks that experience homelessness and housing uncertainty. For all our programs, we're building strategies and implementing supportive practices to safeguard program participants, clients, and staff from ongoing forms of anti-Black racism experienced when attempting to access rental housing and navigate the supportive services. We're also building our own organizational structure, governance, and policies through a decolonized and anti-oppressive lens, centering a culture of care for community, the individuals we work with, and for ourselves. Our second area is developing built spaces for Black communities, in particular the Hogan's Alley block, which will deliver a cultural center, affordable housing, and small business space, as well as childcare facilities. This initiative follows an MOU that we signed with the City of Vancouver in September 2022 and aims to address historical harm to the development of Black and African diasporic communities in Vancouver caused by the city through a series of actions and policies over multiple decades that displaced community, impacting Black communities' overall presence and development in Vancouver. These developments will be grounded in a community land trust, which will protect affordability in the long term and mitigate against the further displacement of Black communities. Finally, our third area of focus is on community building through engagement, collaboration, research, and public education. has been engaging in research-driven community development and advocacy for policy change focused on issues of importance to the Black communities in collaboration with various partners. Our key current research initiative is the Hogan's Alley Housing Solutions Lab, which is providing a deeper understanding of the challenges faced by Black communities in Metro Vancouver around accessing equitable housing and creating safe, affordable, accessible, and suitable housing solutions for Black Canadians. We recognize that it takes a village, and that's why we're dedicating our resources and effort to convene Black communities to support community building, leverage efforts, engage in collective visioning. We're also prioritizing building and nurturing relationships with Indigenous communities, our neighbors, allies, community partners, government, and the general public. As we work towards the development of the Hogan's Alley block, we want to attract more members of the Black and African diaspora communities, organizations, and businesses to the area. And because Hogan's Alley was once the heart of the Black community and a hopeful, multiracial, and multi-ethnic community in the heart of Vancouver, and these efforts will once again ensure that it will be that again. So in closing, the critical need for inclusive housing in Black communities has long been overlooked. Housing is not just about shelter, it's about dignity, equity, and a place where people can thrive. A community hub embedded in a community land trust protects community bonds, affordability, and prevents displacement. Hogan's Alley Society stands as an example of what's possible when a community comes together with dedication, vision, and a relentless commitment to righting past wrongs. And by focusing on Afrocentric, affordable, and culturally sensitive housing, we're creating more than just homes. We're creating places of belonging, healing, and empowerment. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Samantha Eby, and I'm an architect, researcher, and educator based in Toronto. I'm really excited to be here tonight to participate in this conversation. As a young architect, I think the issue of housing is one of the most important ones we're facing both in our profession and in society today, and it's one I spend a lot of time thinking about. In 2020, I received the Prix de Rome in architecture for emerging practitioners, which allowed me to travel to a bunch of cities around the world to explore housing development models for non-market housing. And in addition to that, for the last 2 years, I've had the privilege of spending the majority of my time acting as the project manager for a research project called ReHousing. ReHousing is a research project developed in collaboration with Tough Lab, a research lab at the University of Toronto, and LGA Architectural Partners. Our research studies how you can convert single-family homes into multi-unit housing, or multiplexes. So through my work at ReHousing and my research into non-market housing models, there's something that keeps coming up again and again. And in some ways, it's so simple and obvious that it seems silly to say. Who builds our housing significantly impacts the kind and quality of housing that gets produced. For a long time, Canadian cities have relied on professional developers to deliver the vast majority of our housing. Many traditional housing developments end up being designed with investors in mind rather than end users. And this has resulted in a housing stock that increasingly does not reflect the needs of our communities. If we continue to rely only on the same groups of people who have been our major housing creators for the last few decades, how can we expect the outcome to be different than what we have today? Instead, I think we need to get many more people to be trying many different things and start to build different kinds of housing that reflect the diversity of the people who make up our community. The ReHousing project began in 2022 as a response to the proposal to allow increased density in residential neighborhoods across Toronto. This is not a unique proposal. We're seeing a trend across both Canada and the United States, including here in Vancouver, where cities are revising zoning regulations to permit additional housing units on single-family lots. In May of 2023, the City of Toronto passed new legislation that allowed up to 5 units per lot, 4 in the main house and 1 accessory dwelling unit. And this change represents a tremendous opportunity to boost and diversify the housing stock in the city. In Toronto, nearly 50% of the land in the city was impacted by this policy, and if just 30% of those houses added 2 units, it would result in the creation of approximately 240,000 homes. While these changes in legislation are exciting, achieving their full potential will require more than just a shift in policy. We need to empower and mobilize a new kind of housing creator, one that we at ReHousing like to refer to as the citizen developer. A citizen developer is an owner-occupier and non-professional for whom the creation of new units is a means to more secure housing. This might include homeowners looking to age in place, home buyer groups looking for access to the market, multi-generational households for whom living together is a cultural norm or a necessity, and on a larger scale, nonprofit housing providers like community land trusts. With the right tools and knowledge, we believe these citizen developers can take on their own projects and start to diversify both who is building and the type of housing within our cities. So for the project, as architects, we started with what we know best, which is design. And to show you what 5 units could look like on a lot, we did a survey and identified the 13 most common housing types across the city. Toronto's a big city, and the houses that you find there are quite diverse depending on when they were built and where they were built in the city. So the homes in our catalog range from the pre-war row houses and interwar semis that you find around the downtown core, to the bungalows and backsplits of the post-war suburbs, to the newer housing that you find in the outer rings. To make the project broadly accessible, it was important to provide options. So for each house in the catalog, we provided designs in 4 categories based on the level of complexity and cost for the intervention. So this ranges from low, which is only interior renovations, medium, which includes minor additions and accessory dwelling units, high, major additions, and new, where the existing house is torn down and a purpose-built multiplex is built in its place. All of our designs were made with phasing in mind, each one building on the next, allowing someone to start at a low renovation, and as they build up the finances, expand and build on the work they'd done previously. After completing the design catalog, which is accessible on our website, ReHousing.ca, we've worked with an amazing team of engineers, contractors, planners, and students to develop a guide that investigates all aspects of multiplex development, from design to financing and construction. The goal of the project is to help citizen developers get from the spark of wanting to take on a project, help them check to see what's feasible on their lot, and understand the codes and restrictions that are going to be most critical. And then finally, to help them build a team of professionals that will take their project through to completion. We're really excited to have these next phases of our research launching on our website in just a few weeks. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that multiplex housing is a silver bullet that's going to make housing affordable in Canada. Without municipal guidelines and incentives, we cannot guarantee that the units created will be affordable. And it won't provide the kind of housing needed by some of the groups my fellow speakers are going to speak to today. But I think as we grapple with the housing crisis in our cities, we need to take a yes and approach and proceed with open minds, cooperation, and creativity. I believe these new policy changes, opening up our traditionally protected neighborhoods to densification and diversification, represent a real opportunity to make an impact. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Lisa Rupert with the YWCA Metro Vancouver. It's a pleasure to be part of this important discussion on equitable housing. The housing affordability crisis impacts people differently. One critical issue is the gendered aspect of homelessness. For women, the leading cause of homelessness is intimate partner violence. In just one 24-hour period, there was a survey done last year, and there were 1,055 women and children staying in transition houses across BC, and another 201 people who were turned away that day. For women in this situation, finding safe, affordable housing is particularly challenging because statistically, single women with children have the lowest incomes of any family type. Many women find that they're unable to find a place to live post-separation, and they're economically forced to return to their abuser. It's no coincidence that rates of intimate partner violence and of gender-based homicides have increased over the past few years, alongside the sharp increases in rents. Women simply can't afford to leave. I want to share a few solutions that address the gendered aspects of homelessness, and I want to share a partnership model that's worked well for the YWCA. In our case, it created deeply affordable housing for women and their dependent children, but it's a cost-efficient and replicable way to generally increase affordable housing stock. The first thing is the importance of a gendered analysis in informing policy decisions that address housing equity. In 2018, YWCAs from across Canada successfully advocated with the federal government to recognize the unique barriers that women face in accessing housing and to commit 25% of all funds under the National Housing Strategy to projects for women and their families. We continue to advocate for affordable housing, but we also are calling for the development of a national definition of homelessness that reflects the unique causes, conditions, and experiences of homelessness for women and gender-diverse peoples. You can't fix a problem if you don't name it and properly understand it. The anti-violence sector has been a strong voice for the needs of women fleeing abuse for many years. Over the past decade, we've seen fewer and fewer women able to move from that first stage transition house to second stage transition houses to subsidized housing. What we're seeing is that the first stage transition houses don't have space anymore. They're full, there's nowhere for people to go. So they're staying there longer and longer, and that means nobody else can use them. The same thing's happening in second stage, and pretty much nobody is getting into the long-term affordable housing that they used to be able to get into. We also see people going from first stage house to first stage house to first stage house, and this has a terrible impact, particularly on children. There was a family I knew who stayed in 6 different places over 6 months, waiting to get into something affordable, until they finally landed with us. When they went to our long-term housing, it should have been a really happy time, but for the son who had to change schools yet again in grade 7, he had actually become suicidal, because he had to move, he had to leave his school, he had to leave all his friends yet again. The solution that transition houses are coming up with across the province, born out of necessity, is that they are expanding their services to include building and operating long-term affordable housing for women and for children. The BC Society of Transition Houses, our umbrella organization, has been key in supporting its membership to do this, most recently creating a toolkit for building women-centered housing. I was privileged to be able to share some of the things that are working in YWCA long-term housing, because we've been doing this for a while now, but I also just learned so much from them and from the toolkit. And one aspect that it covers is the need for flexible housing, because women are still predominantly responsible for caring, not just for children, but for senior family members. They provide examples of flexible housing units that have a door between one-bedroom unit or bachelor unit and larger units, so that they can be used for extended family situations where needed, and then closed off into separate units when it isn't needed. This really resonated with me, as we see many women caring for their mothers staying in our second stage transition houses, and there are a few other transition houses that will take them. The definition of family is often limited to parents and their dependent children. And that includes long-term housing too. There's few affordable housing options available for large or extended families. The toolkit also features many images of two innovative YWCA projects, YWCA Causeway Care House and YWCA Pacific Spirit Terrace. Causeway Care House was a partnership with the City of Vancouver and the Vancouver Public Library to build housing above a new library called Úxwumixw. Pacific Spirit Terrace was a partnership with the City of Vancouver and the Vancouver Fire and Rescue Services to build housing above Fire Hall number 5 when they replaced the old one. And yes, I was initially really worried about noise levels, but the sound attenuation worked, and we haven't had a single noise complaint about the sirens. And I want to give a shout out to former Vancouver City Councillor Ellen Woodsworth, because this wasn't our idea. She was the one who had the idea of putting the housing above the library, which then led to the fire hall. And it's made a world of difference to the families who live there. Both Causeway Care House and Pacific Spirit Terrace are located in urban areas, right on public transportation routes, near all essential services and amenities. And this is so critical to people who are living on low incomes and usually don't have vehicles. It really contributes to their ability to participate meaningfully in their communities. We would have struggled to find and afford land in these locations without this partnership. Not only didn't we have to buy land, we benefited from sharing the costs of the builds. The total budget for the Fire Hall project, for example, which was completed in 2019, was $19.3 million. $10.13 million for the replacement of the Fire Hall, and $9 million to build 31 units of housing. We were able to access grants and to fundraise to cover the full amount. We didn't need to have a mortgage, and we were able to raise money for an endowment fund to use to supplement our operating costs. On an ongoing basis, we continue to benefit from sharing maintenance and repair costs. The end result is that we were able to offer housing at deeply affordable rates. At Causeway Care House, all 21 units are rent geared to income, meaning tenants pay 30% of their gross income, or if they're on income assistance, the shelter portion. At Pacific Spirit Terrace, half of the 31 units are rent geared to income, and the other half were set at 65% of BC Housing's high income limits at the time of construction. Those units are now $1,005 a month for a 2-bedroom and $1,205 for a 3-bedroom. If you're not a renter, by comparison, the average rate for a 1-bedroom in Metro Vancouver is now $2,800. In addition to the very affordable rents, the low capital and operating costs of the building means that we're able to provide supports that help tenants to maintain their housing and to improve their long-term economic well-being. We have community development coordinators who connect women to resources and help foster a sense of community within the building. And we have employment navigators who support women to identify their employment goals and chart a path to get there, including having priority in our childcare and accessing YWCA bursaries if they're going to post-secondary education. An additional benefit has been that for women fleeing intimate partner violence, living above a busy library or the fire hall has created an enhanced sense of safety. There's been interest from municipalities across the country in replicating these models, particularly the one above the fire hall. I think they're building more fire halls than libraries these days. By recognizing and addressing the gendered aspects of housing, fostering partnerships with municipalities to best use their resources, we can create housing options that meet the specific needs of women. And the thing that makes me smile every time I see Causeway Care House and Pacific Spirit Terrace is that we ensure that women experiencing intimate partner violence and their children are able to have a life free from abuse. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Stephanie Allen, and I'm a nonprofit real estate developer and corporate strategist who has worked building homes in the private, public, and nonprofit housing sectors for over 21 years. Let's get into it. Despite the important work being done, the housing crisis continues to outpace our collective efforts, and it's the worst it's been in generations. The wealth gap is now a wealth canyon. Housing availability is lagging critically behind demand while some homes sit empty. Renters' lives are turned upside down through repeated cycles of eviction and community displacement. Purpose-built rental is a miracle to find, and once secured, impossible to give up. The dream of owning a home has become a cynical joke for younger generations. Women facing gender-based violence, temporary foreign workers facing exploitation, and youth living in abusive households face the impossible choice of being safe or being housed. Disabled people who have disproportionately high rates of poverty are unable to afford accessible housing, some of whom have tragically been forced to choose medical assistance in dying instead of suffering in substandard housing. Indigenous, racialized, and transgender people continue to face widespread economic discrimination, resulting in significant overrepresentation in the homeless population. NIMBYs and YIMBYs duke it out at public hearings and on social media, unable to find their way to common ground. Lengthy approval processes and burdensome regulations stall the delivery of critically needed homes, and the urban growth machine puts low-income neighborhoods at extreme risk of permanent displacement from city centers. Given the complexity and magnitude of these issues, how can we build an equitable housing system where everyone thrives? After decades in this work and having in-depth conversations with people who range from policymakers and CEOs to disability justice experts and homeless people, and engaging with leading equity theorists, it's occurred to me that the most important solution we haven't fully tried yet is love. Never before has it been clearer that we need to evolve. Human-made ecological collapse has started. Armed conflict is destroying lives, communities, and nations, and deep-seated distrust is driving communities further apart. It's time for our collective next step towards systems of exchange and structures of governance that are grounded on compassion, community care, and mutuality. It will require each of us to challenge our conditioned thinking that says the individualistic pursuit of power and resources will lead to good outcomes. As we can see, it hasn't. And replace that with the belief in the inherent dignity of all people and in sharing our global village equitably and sustainably. Some may think that raising everyone's standard of living will lower their own. But what if, in prioritizing the most disadvantaged among us, we actually raise everyone's quality of life? We've been brainwashed to believe that we can only be safe and secure if we have more than the next person. We must fully interrogate that. If it were true that possessing more gave us joy, the mega-rich would be the happiest people in our society. Are they? I would argue no. To build equitable housing powered by love, we've got to start with ourselves. Love is an inside-out job. We can't give what we don't have. So many of us grew up conditioned to see only our flaws, judging ourselves and everyone around us harshly. After kindergarten, we stopped learning about the power of sharing. By cultivating self-compassion as an antidote to fear, we'll be able to let go of greed, scarcity thinking, unhealthy competition, power hoarding, either-or thinking, perfectionism, and unbridled consumption, replacing these with love-based values like cooperation, generosity, community care, mutuality, respect, and interdependence. With these values firmly ensconced, what does a housing system rooted in love look like in practical terms? First, we would agree that no one in our community, no matter their life circumstances, deserves to be homeless. The ideal of shared humanity grounded in love makes it clear that if one of us suffers, we all suffer. And it's a community care imperative. Next, financial institutions and businesses working along the housing supply chain must hold ourselves accountable to building affordable housing without being burdensome in our pricing. Pay yourselves, your teams, good salary, cover your expenses, invest in R&D, but we can't put profits over people. Instead of one day giving back, take less. Institutionalize a corporate culture of shared community benefit. Developers, construction and design professionals such as architects and engineers, we must collaborate with the communities in which we work, listening to and addressing both concerns and hopes. We must also task our professional associations with developing strategic and tactical initiatives to help us prioritize equitable city building. Ideally, we would evolve housing policy by only electing leaders who are honest and progressive. But we can't wait for that. We must develop networks with people of good conscience who are willing to work with love at the center. The politicians will catch on. They do eventually. Equitable housing will never be possible if housing remains a commodity. A love-based housing system would limit the number of homes any one person can own in the spirit of sharing. Would 2 be a fair compromise? 1 primary residence, 1 vacation home? Let's get into it and come up with a plan. Further, the astronomical appreciation in property values over the last few decades must be considered a community asset and shared equitably through a land value tax. This must be done in conjunction with making sure elders who have been in their homes for decades are provided with high-quality, affordable retirement homes and long-term care, and that their kids have the best affordable housing options possible. These are just a few ideas on how we can transform away from a housing system structured on inequity to one built on care for people and planet. We've tried everything. Let's give love a chance. Thank you.
Well, good evening. I'm Tim Richter. I'm the President and CEO of the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. As our name suggests, our mission is to eliminate homelessness in Canada, but that's becoming increasingly challenging. As you've seen and experienced, and I think probably walking into the theater today, Canada's under a wave of new homelessness. This crisis has been made exponentially more lethal by the global pandemic and a toxic drug supply. But to give you some sense of the scale of the disaster we're facing, homelessness today is bigger than our largest natural disasters in terms of the loss of housing, and is one of the top 10 in terms of the loss of life. We estimate up to 300,000 people will experience homelessness in Canada this year. That's equivalent to the entire combined population of Coquitlam, New Westminster, Langley, and North Vancouver. Homelessness on the scale we see it today hasn't always existed. It began when governments stopped investing in rental housing construction in the early 1980s and eliminated the affordable housing programs in the mid-1990s. Which brings me to the first point I want to make tonight. Homelessness is a housing problem. It's caused by high rent and low vacancy. It is not, and I repeat, it is not caused by mental illness, addiction, poverty, poor choices, or any other personal fault or failing. To illustrate this point, I want you to think about a game of musical chairs, right? I want you to imagine 10 kids around 10 chairs. When the game starts, the first kid to become chairless has a sprained ankle. The next few kids are a bit shy, maybe a bit anxious to play the game well. The next few are smaller than the bigger kids. At the end, a fast, big, confident boy sits victorious in the last available seat. Now, did the kids who lost, did they lose because of a disability? Because of a lack of physical strength? Did they make poor choices in the game? Or were there not enough chairs? Chairlessness, when there are not enough chairs, is the inevitable outcome of this game. Homelessness is caused by a lack of housing, specifically a lack of affordable rental housing. And this lack of housing also drives inequality. Housing scarcity and high cost privileges the privileged. The big, fast, strong, confident white boys will almost always end up with the last chair. If you're interested in learning more, I encourage you to pick up a great book called, wait for it, Homelessness is a Housing Problem, How Structural Factors Explain U.S. Patterns by American housing scholar Clayton Aldhern and data journalist Greg Colburn. And I assure you the patterns that they discovered in the United States are precisely the same as they are here. But it doesn't need to be this way. Homelessness and our housing crisis are solvable problems. If we're serious about solving homelessness, we have to do two really important things. The first is we need to build affordable rental housing. Second, we need to treat homelessness like the disaster it is and build local response systems modeled on disaster response. To restore affordability in Canada's rental housing markets, and I'd argue in the housing market, we need to build over 2 million units of purpose-built rental housing, including at least 655,000 units of social and supportive housing. By comparison, Canada's only built about 500,000 of those units in the last 30 years. Now, this is a massive undertaking. This is a $1 trillion national project that is way too big for any one government or sector to take on alone. The Canadian Alliance recently partnered with a group called RealPAC, which is a national organization for the commercial real estate industry, and we produced something called the National Housing Accord, which is a multi-sector approach to ending Canada's rental housing crisis. In the Accord, we chart a path path out of our housing crisis, and some of the ideas you've already heard today. We could have called the document Back to the Future, because our 10-point plan proposes all the same basic strategies, or many of the same strategies Canada used before to solve earlier housing crises, like in the 1940s and in the 1960s. And all of it starts with federal leadership. But we also need to treat homelessness like the disaster it is. I'm from Calgary, and in 2013, we experienced a flood that forced 77,000 households out of their homes. In 2016, the city of Fort McMurray, the entire city of 75,000, was evacuated due to a wildfire. How many people in Calgary or Fort McMurray, made homeless by the fire or flood, are still homeless today? None of them. Why? Because in a disaster, there's a local disaster response system in place, a system that is focused on an urgent response to the crisis, keeping people safe, and most importantly, rebuilding and getting people back to their homes. Cities lead, senior governments support. There's a command center, there's a plan, an emergency response, data-driven decision-making, and a means of coordination, and a focus on housing. But in most cities, when we're responding to the unnatural disaster of homelessness, we put all of our effort into the emergency response, into shelters, with little or no coordination and little or no focus on housing. We need data-driven, housing-focused homelessness disaster response supported by senior governments in every city in the country. Through Built for Zero Canada, which is a program of the Canadian Alliance, I have the privilege of working with a growing movement of cities, over 50 cities across Canada, using the same strategies as disaster response to end chronic and veteran homelessness. To date, 6 cities have ended homelessness for veterans, 1 has ended chronic homelessness, and 8 are currently sustaining measurable, verifiable, large-scale reductions in chronic homelessness. All of this despite a crushing wave of new homelessness caused by the high cost of housing. Friends, homelessness is solvable. We know what to do and we know how to do it. Homelessness is a choice, but it's our choice to solve it or not. Do we choose to leave our neighbors to suffer and die, or do we choose to build a more equitable and just Canada with housing for all? It's up to us, but I know what I'm going to choose. Thank you.
Hat Sxwíxwtn up. Yuan Hath and Squalwin. Jin Quinn Mintomi up. Sxwíxwtn Queen Kishone. Squamish Úxwumixw. Úxwumixw Hamochton Úxwumixw. It's an honor to be here amongst all of you this evening to share a few words. I shared who I am and where I come from. My ancestral name comes from a village in Úxwumixw on my father's side, and it's a name that connects me to the land since time immemorial. One of our main goals at the Squamish Nation is to help address the housing crisis. We've been listening and walking with our people for many generations. Housing is an issue in our community, in the city we reside in. We have been working with all levels of government, such as the City of Vancouver, the province, and Canada, to create strategic measures to make housing more affordable and accessible in the city. And the Squamish Nation development of Sxwíxwtn is true equitable housing in action on a scale never seen before here in Canada. To share a little bit of history on Sxwíxwtn, which most locals will recognize and know as Kitsilano. Sxwíxwtn has always been an unceded territory of the Squamish people. Our ancestors lived in a village in Sxwíxwtn long before the arrival of settlers. It's an important hub of trade, commerce, social relationships, and cultural practices. Every year, families from our upper Squamish villages would come down seasonally to fish, hunt, and harvest. Our people would build longhouses and brought neighboring tribes together for such things as potlatches and ceremonies. But over time, portions of Sxwíxwtn were expropriated. In 1887, the federal officials created a reserve around the village. That reserve was originally 82 acres. But over the years, more and more land was expropriated. In 1913, the government of British Columbia forced the illegal surrender of our village. Families and everyone who resided there in our community were loaded onto a barge and forced out and set adrift. It was a tugboat company that connected to the barge and toured us or brought us over to a reserve land in North Vancouver. This is something that gutted our people, took us away from what we've known since time immemorial. And I can tell you, my great-grandfather, Andy Paul, lived there as well. And he spearheaded, once we were removed from the village, he fought for it back. And he's one of the ones that dedicated his life to this initiative. After decades-long legal battle, in 2002, the Federal Court of Canada returned a portion of the original reserve to the Squamish people. Of the 80 acres, 10.5 acres were returned. In 2019, the Squamish Nation voted 87% in favor for developing the lands at Sxwíxwtn. Sxwíxwtn has the potential to partially right historic injustice when the people were removed from the land and create a legacy for generations of Squamish to come. Some facts about the development today. It's the largest First Nation residential land development in Canadian history. 6,000 plus rental units that will house up to 9,000 people. 20% of the units are designated for affordable housing. 250 deeply afforded nation member units. I wanted to also share some facts around the sustainability. Sxwíxwtn will demonstrate the nation's climate leadership on a global scale. The goal is to be 100% greenhouse gas emission free. Construction materials include 45,000 square foot of mass timber, generating 50% less carbon than typical concrete construction. 100 million plus investment for a new transit infrastructure, significantly reduced car parking supply and increased bike parking. It'll also include 6 acres of green space and will include many, many pedestrian pathways. The Squamish Nation has always had a deep connection to the lands and waters. Sxwíxwtn will demonstrate the nation's climate leadership, again, on a global scale. To finish, Sxwíxwtn as true reconciliation. This Indigenous private sector collaboration with our partner is another step forward in furthering national reconciliation. The Squamish Nation will not be passive landlords, but active in the development and management of Sxwíxwtn. It is an historic economic opportunity that will help the nation along the path towards complete economic independence, economic wealth, and it will address the urgent needs of housing, education, and social services within our nation. Sxwíxwtn is the future of equitable housing, and the future is happening now. Let's continue this conversation. Chin Kunman Tomi up, Yuan Hopkins Squamish. We'll see.
Thank you again to our speakers, Kishone Roy, reminding us that housing is the issue, not just here in Vancouver, but across the country, and introducing and identifying the idea of generational gentrification. Thank you to Djaka Blais for highlighting the power of community and the importance of investing in it. Samantha Eby, reminding us that we should be designing homes for people who live in them and how people live in them and by those people who live in them. Lisa Rupert, I want to repeat that statistic because it's so shattering and so important to recognize that intimate partner violence is the #1 cause of homelessness for women. But there are creative solutions and case studies in front of us. Stephanie Allen, making the case for love, the bold case for love, but for dignity, for sharing, for a lot of things we were taught as kids, but sometimes seem to forget. Tim Richter, looking at homelessness, comparing it to a natural disaster, reminds us that it's a national disaster, a game of musical chairs, but ultimately a lack of affordable rental housing. And ending with a thank you to Wilson Williams for taking a moment to reflect on the history of land, but also a look forward and a step forward on building things differently. A round of applause again for all of our talkers this evening. Now, I'm going to invite our speakers to get up and make their way before everyone else to the reception. So while they do that, again, feel free to do that. The rest of you, stay put, including those of you who are online. There's a few more things I'm going to share about the Walrus. If you enjoyed tonight's talks, mark your calendars for our next event. The Canadian Women's Foundation presents the Walrus Talks Gender-Based Violence. This is taking place in Toronto on Thursday, November 16th, and we'll also have a free live stream. This builds off one of the talks that we heard today, so there's a nice connection there. You may have also noticed that it's becoming harder and harder to find news in Canada, especially on social media. So the best way to stay up to date with our work is to opt into our newsletter. You can do that online. We're going to send you a follow-up email. We also encourage you to bookmark the walrus.ca on your web browser so you can check in with us and visit us daily. Also, for those of you who are in the room, we have a special deal for you. You can subscribe to The Walrus, 8 issues delivered to your door for just $25 this evening. On your way out, just go downstairs where the reception is. We have a Walrus table set up. Stop by, say hi, we'd like to get to know you. We have the subscription, we have merchandise, and other information available. For 20 years, The Walrus has been home to Canada's most important stories, stories that have shaped who we are now as a country, and we're able to continue this work thanks to our community of support. But with the rise of artificial intelligence and misinformation, these days it is getting harder to distinguish fact from fiction. What's also unique about The Walrus is we publish fact and fiction, journalism and creative writing. So if you believe in this work, help us secure the future of storytelling and consider making a donation. We're independent, we're a registered charity, and all donations $20 or more receive a charitable tax receipt. So you can do so at that table, for those of you in the room, and anyone online, go to thewalrus.ca/fall donate. This is part of our fall fundraising campaign. Thank you to the TD Ready Commitment for partnering on this conversation tonight. A thank you as well to the Walrus's 2023 national partners, Air Canada, Inspire, and Rogers. And thanks everyone, I heard a little baby, so young and old, in person and online, for joining us and being part of the Walrus community. Have a great evening, everyone. The work continues.